Good evening, everybody, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be joining us from. I am excited to have our guest, Tim Campos, here today. I'm Greta Larson from the Private Equity Program. We have just a few logistics. If you haven't been to a webinar with us in the past couple weeks, we use a Zoom webinar. If you can use this chat button with a red box around it, that's the best way to submit a question, and we'll be going through the questions during the Q&A. And also you can send us a message if you want as well. Anyway, I think we've all been on a lot of webinars these days, so hopefully everyone's comfortable. And I'd like to turn it over to Dean Costis Maglaris. We're privileged to have him come join us this evening. And Dean, why don't you take it from here? Thank you.
Thank you very much for including me in this event. It is great that you've taken the leadership, Donna, of organizing all of these events. And I know that students appreciate it, and a lot of us actually also join in because these are both interesting and easily accessible. Unlike other programming that we typically do at the school. Let me just start by doing a brief introduction of our two panelists. First of all, my colleague, Donna Hustrich, and Tim Campos, who is a graduate of our executive MBA program that we used to run with Berkeley Has back in 2011. And he's now the co-founder and chief executive officer of Woven. And I'll say a few words later on about that. This is, it's amazing that we can have a program. I'm sure that we're all in different states, probably, and we're all coming in this virtual room in order to actually share some ideas. And it's great that, Tim, you're taking the time to actually join us and do it for us. Thank you. So it is my pleasure to spend a couple of minutes introducing Donna and Tim. And Donna has been at the school since 1992, and she's a senior lecturer and director of Private Equity Program, which is an amazing program here at the school. Bernstein faculty leader at the Sanford Bernstein Center for Leadership and Ethics. And prior to coming to the school, she had an investment banking career with CSFB, JP Morgan, and Bank of America. She has been instrumental in growing, nurturing, and managing our private equity program at the school, which is extremely popular, rigorous, and successful. She has won many awards from our students. Recognize excellence and commitment, and both in teaching and in commitment in running and providing these opportunities for everyone involved. And she was also involved, and he has won awards in the joint program with Berkeley. And I imagine that probably you met back then. About 10 years ago. So she currently teaches corporate finance, business and law, and M&A, and she's really a staple of the school and an extremely valuable colleague. So thank you, Donna, for doing that. Let me just say a few words about Tim. I actually first met Tim maybe a little bit more than 2 months ago when life was very different. I was in California, and I went to see him in the offices of his company. And at that point in time, there were 5 individuals, if I remember correctly, in the office, and about, but the other ones were actually video conferencing into the office. So they were doing what we're doing today, but they were doing it 2.5 months ago. And so Tim started this company maybe a couple of years ago. And prior to that, he was the chief information officer of Facebook. And prior to that, he was the youngest CIO of a Fortune 500 company, KLA Tencor. When his stint at Facebook was during the growth years from 2010 to 2016, that it was a period of growth, acquisitions, new products and services, and I would say tremendous innovation. And he has now brought that into his new company, Woven, that we're going to talk about in the sequel. He is, I guess, a staple of the Silicon Valley area. He's on the board of directors of very many companies. He is, I imagine, a mentor and an advisor and an investor in many other companies, and plugged into the ecosystem, so to speak. And he's a kinder spirit with me. He has an electrical engineering background. It's just that he stopped after the first degree and then switched to an MBA, whereas I went all the way to my PhD. But somehow I made it back to the business school. And I have to say one anecdote, and then I'm going to pass it to Donna. And that was, I went to see him because Tim, in 2 weeks from today, essentially, or almost 2 weeks from today, he was slated to win an achievement award from the business school in an annual dinner on May 4th, which now has been postponed for some kind of unknown date that we're trying to pin down. And so now I went to meet him to get to know him and talk a little bit about the company and when I was visiting the Bay Area, and it was fantastic. The other thing that happened there is it literally brought me back about, I would say, 25 years. Because when I was doing my PhD at Stanford, a lot of my classmates had started companies. That was the pre-dot-com era in the mid-90s. And they had offices similar to Tim's. There were like a bunch of desks and computers, very sparse. Occasionally you would see a sofa or a sleeping bag in a corner. And that's exactly how it is there. And there's amazing energy and innovation. And it is fantastic that you're here to share with us both the past and the present and the future. So thank you for joining us. So thank you both for doing it. And I'm going to turn it to Donna for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. That was great. Thanks for taking the time to see us today and to spend some time and to do that very kind introduction of myself and of Tim. And so we'll get right to it here. We got to move to the next slide. There we go. So as the Dean kindly mentioned, I'm the director of the private equity program. And there are many fabulous things about working at Columbia Business School and also being fortunate as I am to be an alum of Columbia Business School. And one of them is the support of the Dean's office in allowing us to do sort of entrepreneurial things. And so the Dean was very kind in talking about us setting up the webinars, but it's only because of the support of himself and the other people in the Dean's office like Kent Daniel that we're able to come up with an idea and sort of run with it. So thank you very much, Dean, for your support in allowing us to do that. If you'd like to find out about some more webinars we have, you can just check out the Private Equity Program website. You'll find out the webinars that we've had and the webinars we've had in the past, as well as some of the information that the participants and the speakers allowed us to share in connection with that. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, our next webinar coming up is on Thursday, April 30th, and we have another Columbia alum, also a former student of mine, Sterling Thomas, who's a PhD, and he's been doing a lot of the modeling for the government and for Homeland Security in connection with COVID. So we'll hope you'll be able to join us in connection with that. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Tim now, who's going to be able to, the Dean gave a very kind introduction to Tim, who's going to talk a little bit about Tim, I thought we'd let you chat for a little bit about sort of how you made it to Berkeley, sort of this idea of investing in oneself, because you had a career before you came to EMBA, and the Dean pointed out that is where we met. I met Tim in the corporate finance class. I was the corporate finance professor for Berkeley EMBA for many years, and that was just an amazing class. They were all amazing classes, but Tim's class in particular. And several of Tim's classmates I keep in touch with, including Matt Cooper, who's been kind enough to come out on several occasions and speak to my business law class. So talk a little bit about that sort of decision to invest in yourself. And then when you and I met, I remember you were thinking just about going to Facebook at the time. And so you sort of, quote unquote, took a chance on Facebook and then leaving Facebook and now, starting a startup and sort of doing something in an environment that's difficult to do a startup anyway, and even more challenging now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim to chat, and then I will be managing the chat box here and collecting the questions. So please put them in the chat, and we'll ask them for Tim at the end of his remarks. So Tim, take it away.
Well, thanks for having me here, Donna, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. It's a great honor. So yeah, let me dive right into it. I want to share a couple of stories and anecdotes on my background, which hopefully will be of inspiration or might provide some interesting guidance for those who are on the webinar today. My background, as the dean mentioned, I'm an engineer. I started my career as a software engineer at Sybase and Silicon Graphics. Worked at a startup during the .com era. And I had been very successful in essentially climbing the corporate ranks. I actually started my career thinking that it was nice and simple. I would become a CEO one day, and I would do that by being a really good software engineer, and then I'd become an engineering manager, and then a director of engineering, and then so on and so forth, and then I'd eventually land as a CEO. And I didn't quite realize how important other parts of business were to that journey. And I also didn't realize that things in life generally don't happen in a straight line. It's actually quite common for them the line to be very jagged. And in my case, sometimes the line required some things that look like step backwards, but they were actually big step forwards. They just took time to play out. Roughly starting in 2003, I joined a company called KLA-Tencor. For those of you who haven't heard about it, I don't blame you, but it's actually a fairly large Silicon Valley company, very important to the semiconductor industry. And I had been promoted to Chief Information Officer, as the dean mentioned. I was very young at the time. I was 32 years old. This was a big, not only goal for me, but it was a great honor. And that led me to really, I was working really, really hard and wanted to be very successful in that role. And I was, but it had created a bit of a problem for me that, after being at KLA-Tencor for 7 years and in that CIO role for 4, I started to find that I was really, really not excited about the things that I was doing. In part, I'm not a semiconductor person, but also I just found that my job had become focused more on business objectives that were not as interesting to me. And I had known that the investment in oneself is probably one of the best bets that you can make, because there were times in my career prior to this moment where I had decided I was going to do something that would be good for me, but might not necessarily look good on paper. I had taken smaller roles that might lead to bigger roles. And I felt confident that if I did that again in this moment, that that might lead to something. And that's what ultimately led me to business school. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about getting an MBA. I had convinced myself that it wasn't, not only was it not necessary, but I should really only do it for the right reasons, that it wasn't something I needed to move on in my career. It was something that would perhaps be a fulcrum point, a point of transition, but it would, that would not be because of the title or the credential or the next job that it might enable, but because of the people that I would meet and what I might learn through the process. And once I became comfortable with that, then I made the decision that I was going to go back to business school. And that's what ultimately got me to Columbia. Now, the story gets a little bit more interesting. I applied to business school in 2008 and was accepted in the beginning of 2009. And also what happened in 2008 is the financial crisis hit. And that was creating a very interesting set of challenges for KLA-Tencor, and a set of challenges that I really didn't want to be a part of for the long term. So I made a difficult choice to resign. And for an executive role, you don't just resign and leave. There's an orderly way to do it. So I ended up staying with the company for 9 months to identify a successor and transition out. But what was notable, the reason I left was, along the same decision that got me into business school, I wanted to make a change. And I knew that I wasn't going to make that change staying at KLA Tincor. I did not realize how big the financial crisis was going to be. I did not realize how much of a problem that was we were facing in the beginning of 2009. But in some respects, it didn't matter, because what the higher order bit was that investment, that choice to do something risky, that choice to, I like to refer to it as career skydiving, jumping out of a perfectly good job for the hope of a better one, with the confidence that you're going to be able to enable it. And here, in July, or I guess our program started in May of 2009. I found myself in business school by July of 2009 by choice that I had made. I was, essentially out of work and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. But I was in the perfect position, especially given, the state of the economy, to start thinking about what was next. And that's what that time in my life ended up being about. It was about creating the space to create new, big opportunities for myself. And those opportunities were not just professional, they were also personal. The relationships that I built during that time were amazing. They were also educational. Just to give Don a little bit of kudos, I remember going into corporate finance the first day and listening to Donna give an overview of what we were going to cover in the class, and it was entirely Greek to me. These concepts of valuation and WACC and enterprise value and all this stuff just didn't make any sense, and it seemed actually kind of scary. And the way that Donna introduced it was like, I'm going to drill this into your head. You're going to know it like the back of your hand. You're going to be able to read an income statement and a balance sheet like a musician reads a sheet of music, and that seemed impossible to me. And the only thing that gave me hope was the previous class loved it so much that they came in to give us an introduction to Donna, to tell us how incredible this class was going to be for us. And it was. Fast forward several years when I became a board member at JDS Uniphase in 2014. If I hadn't been in that class, if I hadn't learned the things that I had learned from Donna, I would not have been eligible for that role, let alone capable of performing effectively. The amount of the skills and the insights and the learnings that I gained from Columbia and from Donna's class in particular turned out to be incredibly valuable for me later on in my career. I think the last thing that I want to just mention on this question is I want to go a little bit deeper on the personal relationships. Coming to business school, for me, one of the big things that I knew that I was going to get out of business school was relationship with others. I completely underestimated it. I completely underestimated what it was going to mean for my life. And fast forward to today, my class is so intimately involved in what I am doing now. I co-founded a company with a classmate. I take vacations and travel with two classmates who are my best friends. I live next door to another classmate. I have an investment club that involves yet another classmate. So much of the people that I met in the program have been a part of my life that was something that, as we get into some of the later questions that you have, I want to provide a preview that's been a really important thing for me.
Okay, so if you wanted to, that was great for the beginning. So it sounds like you're a satisfied customer. It sounds like from Columbia. So thanks for that, Tim. That was good. That was good. But and it was really an amazing class, and it was a large class. We had about 75 people, but it was great. It was people from all walks of the place, and it really kind of gelled. And my whole experience at Berkeley was kind of like that. It was a very tight group. So you invested in yourself. I like that idea of that you're sort of career skydiving. I just want to follow up on one thing about that before we move to the next thing about sort of how you decided to take a chance on kind of Facebook, right? But is it easier to do that career skydiving, you think, in a market like this, or is it easier when sort of everything's buttoned up? Like, what do you think? Just your opinion.
I actually think it's easier to do it in a market like this, but for the simple reason that sometimes some of the harder choices are made for you. So, you know, the issues that occurred during the .com era, thrust changes on my career. I had my startup went under, so I had to make a change to go to a different company. In 2009, the financial crisis, basically wiped out a lot of value, and you had a lot of, huge recession and a long recovery that stemmed from that. But the other side of it, in addition to some of the decisions can become easier, is that going into this type of environment is always scary. Values being destroyed, businesses are going under, jobs are being lost. It's difficult to look at that with enthusiasm and optimism because we're realizing the pain and the fear of the present. But when you look forward into the future, what that is doing is it's basically creating new opportunities. And it's kind of like forest fire destroys the beautiful mountainside, but in its wake, it creates the opportunity for a new forest to grow. If you look at businesses that were started between 2009 and 2012, they're some of the largest businesses that we have today. Companies like WhatsApp and Uber and others, and part of that was because of just the state of the environment and the economy at the time. It created the motivation for new opportunities. So I actually think it is easier, but doesn't mean it feels better. It actually feels worse.
Oh, no pain, no gain, right? And you did okay there. Now, what about the idea though? This I think is even more difficult, right? So now you go to Columbia, you got the skill set that you wanted, you met the friends that you wanted, you have the relationships that you wanted. Why not go to a sort of a more secure corporate type of job? Why take a chance on Facebook? What was your sort of thinking on that? Because you also had a family, right, when you came to business school. It wasn't like you were kind of going to be able to take a flyer. I mean, you were established. So walk us through sort of your thinking on that, how you do that.
Yeah, and it's worth, that may sound like kind of a weird question in today's day and age, but if you take yourself back to 2010, Facebook had barely survived a competition with MySpace and was struggling to get above a certain growth. It wasn't clear that Facebook was an actual business as opposed to a technology that lots of people wanted to use. The advertising product was generally, it worked, but it was not perceived to be very good at all. Google had not yet decided to move into the social networking space, and it was widely perceived that as soon as that happened, Facebook was just going to die, that Facebook would be the next MySpace. So that was the condition of the company back then. It was good, but not great. And it certainly wasn't preordained that it was going to do as well as it did. So the decision that I was facing is, what did I want to do? Now, you mentioned, why didn't I think about, a safe corporate job versus Facebook? And I actually had a third option, which is I'm going to start a company. And the safe corporate job was actually the first thing that crossed my plate. Given my background and experience, that I remember I had a fantastic opportunity from a company called Network Appliance. Executive role, Network Appliance in 2010 was one of the best tech companies that was there. Big, growing, healthy, and it was good role. But it was not going to achieve any of my long-term life goals. Economically, it was a good job, but not a life-changer job. More importantly, it kind of felt like a small upgrade from where I was at KLA Tencor. This wasn't the kind of thing that I felt was going to take full advantage of all that I had to offer as a leader. And I wasn't particularly excited by the idea of safe. I've always been kind of drawn to risk taking. And you mentioned something that is actually a mantra of mine, which is no no risk, no reward, no guts, no glory. If it's easy, if it's safe, you're probably not going to get a huge amount out of it. That's been my experience in my life. And so I've been much more drawn to the risky things. And to be quite frank, the riskiest opportunity that I was facing actually wasn't Facebook. It was to do a startup. I was going to do a startup with a classmate and actually two other classmates. And the only reason that wasn't option number one is one of those two classmates ended up getting poached by Google. I got a fantastic role from Google. And even though he really wanted to do the startup with us, he decided he was going to go off and do that. And he was a key part of this company idea. And so Facebook was, for me, kind of the other really interesting option. I looked at the company, and I remember coming in to interview with Mark Zuckerberg. He was the last interview that I had, and he asked me what I thought about the company after talking to everybody else that I had met with. And the thing that had really caught my eye about Facebook as an organization was its emphasis on culture and the strength of the people that were there. And that gave me a lot of confidence that even though this company hadn't proven everything yet, even though this company, had some real competitive threats coming on the horizon with Google, that it had some pretty freaking smart people, that it was going to do fantastically well in that. And not only that, but the culture would bring out the best in those people. And that was what was inspiring me. I was attracted to Facebook because I saw this was a company where I could really spread my wings and be the best version of myself at that time in my career. And so I took that risk. And in fact, I took the risk of even having the opportunity to interview at Facebook by declining that first safe corporate job. Just kind of sticking with this idea of risk taking. I passed up the bird in the hand for potentially two in the bush because it was more aligned to what I wanted to accomplish with my life goals. That is what ultimately pushed me over to Facebook. Now, getting into the company was, just an amazing experience. Those first few months, I was introduced very quickly to the controversies that would constantly surround Facebook. The 2010 was when the movie The Social Network was released, which was not a flattering view of Mark Zuckerberg. There was constant user pushback to feature changes that Facebook was pushing out. And it was struggling to grow. It was hitting a threshold that it was trying to get above. It reached 500 million users, and it was trying to get above that and was having some growth challenges. And I got to be a part of, not just have a first-hand seat, but be a part of how does an executive team at an organization like that solve these problems? And I was just not just amazed by what I saw, really inspired by what I saw. To take the Facebook movie, Social Network movie as an example, when that movie came out, Mark Zuckerberg got a bunch of buses, brought them to the campus, took everybody at the company down to Mountain View Cinemas, and we all watched the movie together. And he was quite open and transparent on how, what about that movie was accurate and what wasn't. And we really felt connected to him through it. So even though it wasn't painting this favorable light, we felt like our leader here he's not shying from this. He's facing it. He's embracing it. And he's allowing us to hear from him, but also make our own judgments on, well, what kind of leader do we work for and what kind of company do we work at? And so that turned out to be not a negative experience for employees at all, but quite the opposite, quite a very positive one. With the challenges on user growth, Facebook has a very diligent data team, which is very disciplined and organized on how they look at problems, and they break problems down into their core essence from a data perspective. And to be a part of that and to see Facebook find new ways to grow gave me confidence that it was not only going to have no problem crossing the 600 million user barrier and the 700 million user barrier, but that at some point, the entire planet was going to be using this product. And they have maybe not achieved that last objective, but they've gotten very close. They certainly have a major percentage of the internet connected population. And I just was really inspired by these leadership lessons that I was experiencing firsthand, and it drew me to build my own. For my organization, what is it that we're going to do that's going to be exceptional and differentiated? And what I found is that when a company gets to that level of quality of talent and mission-led, as a mission-led culture, it starts to really attract the best. And as Facebook was getting bigger, instead of it having some of the problems that a lot of large organizations do, that you outgrow your leadership and you start having bureaucracy that slows the company down and starts losing the essence of what it made it great, Facebook was actually accelerating. It was getting better. It was able to hire and attract talent that was more specialized in areas like public policy or in machine learning and artificial intelligence or in advertising and marketing. And we were accelerating because we were hiring more and more exceptional people. And that was feeding on itself. Exceptional people wanted to come to Facebook because that's where the exceptional people were working. And that led to all of the accelerated growth that you saw between 2010 and 2016. And so that really was probably the most amazing part of my tenure at the company, was the ability to see and be a part of that growth.
So now let's take it, because I want to get to Woven, but so now that sounds great. You got fabulous experience. So how did you decide to leave? And then leaving, I mean, you would just have a myriad of opportunities, including startup, but also sort of being an investor, like working, having your own fund, and then looking at other companies, because I see in your bio, and I know you're passionate about stuff and you're passionate about helping others. And so, how did you sort of think about leaving and then think about doing a startup versus saying, okay, I'm going to have a fund and I'm going to help other companies grow? So maybe you can walk us through that, and then we can get to the last part before we open up the questions, which is Woven today.
Yeah, so this was not easy. Facebook, in many respects, when I got there, I knew it was going to represent a significant point in my career, and it was going to be hard to top. Especially the growth that it faced from 2010 to 2015 and 2016. This was really an exceptional time to be a part of an organization like that. But I also knew, even going into Facebook, I wasn't going to retire from it. That was never my objective. I wasn't searching for the next company that I was going to spend 30 years at. I wanted to go to Facebook to be a part of its growth and its success. I didn't know exactly how long I wanted to stay. But I also knew, given the nature of the company, if I was going to achieve my life goals of, running my own organization, being a CEO, that wasn't going to happen at Facebook. That, Mark Zuckerberg was, he's the guy, and he's going to stay being the guy for a long period of time. So that somewhat capped it. Then it was just a question of how and when was I going to leave. I think the thing that started to trigger it, for a long time, as I mentioned, as Facebook was getting bigger, it was getting better. But it was also starting to create a new set of challenges for itself. When Facebook, it was, just this growing technology, but not really a business. It had more of a scrappy attitude of problems that it had to solve. There it was operating. It was a piece of the larger world, but it wasn't the universe itself. As it got bigger, it started to really dominate certain things. It became a predominant news source for a significant percentage of the world's population. And it started to have impact on things like political discourse. And that was introducing a whole new set of problems. And while they're interesting problems, they're not easy problems to fix. And they're very different from growth. And they were not the kind of problems that were necessarily calling to me. Moreover, as the company was starting to face these issues with privacy problems and issues with the company's role in the 2016 election, This was really starting to create more friction internally. And what I started to find, the company did this survey every 6 months where you answer the question, how much time are you spending on the things that you love? That number was had stopped growing for me, and it was starting to go down. And that was a signal that it was time to think, not necessarily leave, but think about what it is that I wanted to do next. I knew that I did not want to do something easy. As you hopefully picked up from my personality, that's just the kind of person that I am. I could have done something easy. I could have gotten another CIO role someplace else. I could have maybe done a CEO role of an already established company. And those things were attractive, but they felt things that I would be able to do later on in life. I wanted to do something that was even harder than that. And I started to look at problems that one might go start a company around. And that's when I got inspired by the thing that ultimately became Woven. And it is for that focus on the startup that I ultimately left Facebook. I left Facebook to go do what I am doing now. And what I was seeing, having worked at Facebook and being a part of driving the productivity of the workforce and really changing how work is done at a next generation company, is that the future of work was going to be different. It was going to be a different set of tools and technologies than are well adopted today. And some of that has already come to pass. I was seeing things like video conferencing being just an inherent and indispensable part of how Facebook collaborates. We were doing literally tens of millions of minutes a month of video conferencing by the time that I left the company. And some of it were things that maybe are not as obvious, like just how employees and people would collaborate, how they would share information with each other. And so I was interested in that problem, in what is now called the future of work, or often referred to as productivity software. I saw that there was significant opportunities here. Within this, I saw a problem that was ripe for disruption, but wasn't being disrupted for several big reasons. And that was the issue of how people spend time. Time to me seemed very valuable, very important. There's only 24 hours in a day. It is the one thing that, whether you're Warren Buffett or you are a philanthropist or you are an individual contributor, we all have the same amount of time. And what defines us is how we choose to spend that time. So that seems a very meaningful problem. The technology that we use to manage our time is very nascent. It's not much better than the technology we used 30 years ago when we would put into a paper diary what our appointment plans are. That's basically what the digital calendar has become. And I saw that in this new world of future of work that we were going to head to, that there was an opportunity to think about the calendar differently. And that's, as I got deeper into this, I started to realize that there were many structural issues here. You have big dominant players, Microsoft and Google, that make it difficult for startups to go to market. You've got technical complexity that makes it hard to build a solution in this space. And these were hard things. And what is attractive to me about hard things, particularly in the context of a startup, is hard things scare other people away. They make the competition less likely to be there. And they also were things that needed investment, and I knew that I would be able to get significant investment leaving Facebook for any of a number of different ideas that I had. And this is a space that has the potential to be really, really big. Productivity software, which is used by knowledge workers. You're talking about a population of people. It's about 800 million in the planet overall. There are tens of billions of dollars spent on productivity software every year and growing significantly. So that's what attracted me to the space. The confidence that, or the idea that it was hard was actually made it even more attractive. And the knowledge that, I could really only leave Facebook once. And so if I was going to do it, I needed to do it for something big. And so I chose to leave Facebook to create the startup. I created the startup with a fellow Columbia classmate, a gentleman by the name of Burr Charpot, whom I met in the Berkeley Columbia program when I joined, and we had stayed close throughout. I'd hired him to join me at Facebook after he went to Google. He was the one who was going to do that startup with me. So I knew that I had some of the resources to get going. I had a great Rolodex, so I could make a lot of calls to get investment. And I had a problem, which, to be quite frank, a lot of people were scared of investing in because productivity software in 2016 wasn't very attractive. But they believed in the vision that I was outlining, and a lot of things that I had hoped would come to pass absolutely have. The productivity software market has been turned upside down by a number of technologies that have come to market. Companies like Zoom, companies like Slack, that have had very successful IPOs and that have been key to enabling a new kind of work in the environment. Even in the private market, there's been a number of very large, significant companies like Airtable, which is a next generation spreadsheet, or Notion, which is a next generation note-taking application. These companies both have billion plus market valuations. We have companies like Superhuman, which is a next generation version of email. That this space has now started to really heat up and accelerate because the future of work is changing. In fact, when Kostas came out to visit me, I remember showing him when he came to my office, one of the things I wanted him to see was how we worked. He mentioned that half of my employees weren't in the office that day, which was quite common. And I was showing him how we log into a Zoom portal, and that's how the people who are remote from the office collaborate with the people who are in the office. And that between Zoom, Slack, Woven, and GitHub, that those were all the technologies that we needed to build our product and to build our business. And then the coronavirus hits, and all of a sudden we're now thrust into a world which has already been transformed by these technologies, but in a slow and methodical manner, except now we have to rapidly accelerate. We have to go from everybody is working in an office to everybody is working from home. We have to go from an environment where things like education are delivered in a classroom to they are now delivered online. We have to go from a world where business is done with a face-to-face meeting, business travel, handshakes, to a world where it requires us to coordinate time with each other remotely and spend time over technologies like Zoom. And this transition is really just beginning. I think what we are seeing with the coronavirus outbreak is really starting to accelerate this trend that has already been going on for the last couple of years. And we're going to see that when these shelter-in-place orders start to abate, that many of the changes are permanent, that many of the changes in terms of how companies use video conferencing will stay because they've learned how to incorporate it. That working from home, it might not be the only way to work, but it will certainly be much more commonplace because people have figured it out. And those things have also created the market that I hoped would exist for my product, where we need to find new and better ways to not only meet and spend time with each other, but to track and manage that time so that we can spend it on the things that matter most to us. That our work and our personal lives are more intertwined and integrated than they ever have been before, because you can't, you don't have the same separation between the office and your home when the office is in your home. So these are the things that I saw as potential, and was what gave birth to the ideas that ultimately led to my company and why I created the business and chose to leave Facebook for it.
Yeah, so let me talk about that though a little bit, because I agree with you. I think there are some things that are going to change. I mean, I spent my career in investment banking and flew around all the time, and there was a lot of inefficiencies in that. There's no doubt about it. But, and the dean mentioned it, Costis mentioned it was when he was on the phone too, about the energy in the room at these startups and stuff like that. So, how do you, and one of our questions here from the audience is, how do you assess culture? And indeed, I have a broader question for you. I mean, how do you create a culture now that you're dealing with um, this teleconferencing, right? This lack of sort of human connection. I mean, I met you and all those great folks in Berkeley because we spent a lot of time together in the classroom, having lunch, walking to class afterwards, all of that stuff. So, I mean, how do you deal with that? Or that's not that important? I mean, how does that figure into the whole thing? And how do you create a culture now that we are going to be doing some things more by remote?
It's a great question. And I actually don't think that doing it remotely, creates an impediment at all. The answer to the question starts with being very deliberate about it. Facebook was incredibly deliberate about its culture. So if you would visit a Facebook office, and probably some of the attendees have, you see posters all over the place of things like move fast and break things, and fortune favors the bold, and what would you do if you're not afraid? And these would be, we call them memes that were essentially mini stories to remind people of cultural attributes that we thought were important in the company. Culture is what you reward. It's what you talk about. It's the stories that you tell. It's not a 5-point list of values that you think about once and then don't reinforce. And so in the company, what I learned at Facebook is to get the culture that we had to be very deliberate about it. Even when we would expand to a new office, like when I started Facebook, we didn't have a London office. We didn't have a Seattle office. When we created these offices, we would take culture carriers, people who exemplified the cultural attributes that the company cared about, and we would use them. We would have them. We would encourage them to go move to these places and live there for 2 years so that they could be the ones to impart the cultural ideas on everybody that they hired and that we brought into the company. When we would interview, we'd have a role in the one of the interview roles, which was about was a behavioral interview, and it basically is the easiest way to assess, is somebody going to align to the culture that you want or not? How do they behave in certain circumstances? And so, not only was Facebook very deliberate about this, we've been very deliberate about this with Woven. This has been the most important part of the recruiting process for us, is to really understand who people are and how they are going to react in different circumstances. And that one interview we spent a lot of time on. And it doesn't matter whether you do the interview face-to-face or remotely. You're really asking people about how they would behave in certain circumstances. So in today's remote world, you do have to do some things differently, just like we have to do things differently in terms of how we're going to hang out socially. But you just find the digital analogs for those things, and that does make it possible to assess this. So we've actually continued our recruiting at Woven since the shelter in place, and we've had a lot of success both finding candidates that we want to give offers to and candidates that we are going to pass on, both for technical reasons and cultural reasons.
That's interesting. What do you think about, and you probably can't remember all of the classes that you took at Columbia, but this question is a good one in terms of, because you learn, and that was one of the key themes of kind of what you've been talking about, is sort of this continuous learning. And that certainly has been an advantage of Columbia Business School, and one of the objectives of the dean is really with our Alumni Edge product, is to keep people continuously learning. So what skills did you have in your first startup, which you said didn't work out so well, that you sort of now possess in your second startup? So in other words, sort of what have you kind of learned and brought to the table as you've moved from startup number one to startup number two?
Well, startup number one wasn't my startup. I just worked at it. So there was a big difference in leadership role. I was a part of the leadership team, but I didn't have strategic leadership decision making. But it's still a good question. I mean, one of the things that I learned at that startup is, at startups, it's very important to have just absolute clarity on what the goals are. because failure to achieve them, there's no safety net, right? You don't have the corporate entity to keep funding your project. If your business isn't successful and you're not making more money than you're spending, then you go out of business and you're done. So startups very much need to be very clear about their goals, and that has to be uniform across the entire organization, every single role. And that also leads to something that you need to be comfortable with. In a company like Facebook, as we get bigger, we were able to get better by hiring specialists, people who knew one thing really, 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 really well. Those people aren't necessarily very good at startups, because at a startup, you have to be very broad. You have to do a lot of different things. You have to wear a lot of different hats. And sometimes the issue of the day is, customer service. So we need more people on the front lines there. Sometimes the issue of the day is technical, and so you need to code. Sometimes the issue of the day is fixing the door, and so you need to be a janitor. Whatever the issue is that is called for, you need to wear that hat, and that's a different kind of skill set than a lot of corporations attract and reward. And so I think there are some people who are really only able to work in startups, and other people who are only able to work in corporations. And there's some people like myself who are comfortable in both, but you have to be clear about what your strengths and your skills are so that you understand where you need to supplement yourself and where you can be versatile. So I think that's an important part to keep in mind in all this.
No, that's great, and it actually leads very well into the next question, which is, how do you, and you've mentioned this, and you've talked about woven in this context too, about how interconnected our personal lives are and our business lives. So how do you find that time to sort of decouple and de-stress? Because it is kind of stressful putting out all those fires, and frankly, it's nice to have other people's money, but there's got to be some level of stress involved with playing with other people's money. So how do you handle that stress? How do you sort of keep things in perspective? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very much, and I don't want this to become a commercial about my product, but this is part of why I created Woven. Time allocation is really, really important. I'm not going to do I tore my Achilles in January. I'm not going to do my physical therapy if I don't make the time to do it. One of the problems I mentioned earlier is it's very hard to distinguish between work life and home life when work is literally in the home. So it's easy to overwork and become counterproductive because you're not taking enough rest and taking care of yourself. So I have found for myself, it's very important for me to create what that space is. For most of my career since going to Facebook, a big barrier here has been the weekends. For me, I have not wanted to work on weekends so that I can give that time to my kids and to my family. And that's where I spend my time. And that has it's helped keep me married. It's helped me maintain a good relationship with my kids. On the other side of that is during the week, I'll put a lot of time and energy into my company. In a COVID-19 world, it's a little bit more difficult because it's so easy to transition from one to the other. And what I have found is, again, that time blocking, just being very deliberate on these are the work hours that I'm going to work, and these are the hours that are personal, and even blocking them out so that I don't schedule personal events during my work time, and I don't schedule work events during my personal time, and keeping those things separate. And we actually have dashboards in the product that lets me see how I'm doing on that front. How much time am I spending in my after hours on work things? And I really try to minimize that to keep that balance.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mean, especially when you think about sort of the Fitbits and everything else that'll tell you your steps, your heartbeat, your this, your that, how many, it's true. I think some days, and we've been talking about this a lot with my colleagues, that, I've been very productive. I've done all these Zoom calls, and then I'm like, where did the time go? So it'd be great to actually see, kind of where the time actually went, because I bet you it doesn't go where I think it goes. Anyway, we have another question here, a really great question from Doug on sort of data privacy. I mean, sort of what do you see happening in terms of that? I know we have a little bit different regime here in the United States than outside the United States. How do you see that sort of moving forward? Is that going to be kind of an issue that people are going to have to confront?
Well, it already is an issue. So, Facebook obviously has gotten in big trouble because of how it has managed people's data. That's been probably one of the dominant issues the company has faced since I left. We've seen manipulation of data, both in the political space with the election. We've seen manipulation of data in terms of identity theft. We've had huge potential data breaches at one of the major credit rating agencies, leading to literally half of all Social Security numbers being out in the open. This is a major issue. At the same time, it's also a big opportunity. Facebook is a data business. Like, what creates value for Facebook is, not the quality of the application and that you can upload a photo and other people can see it. It's that photo itself, because what that tells, about you, who you are, who you're connected with, what you're interested in, how active you are, where you are. Creates a profile around you that Facebook is able to sell as an advertisement to other people, and that is the reason why Facebook has the valuation that it does. That data is very, very valuable. My business is a data business. We're in the business of calendaring data, and calendars are not just about where am I going next, but in my entire history of my life, like, who have I met with, how frequently do I meet with them, so on and so forth. So data is both a liability and it's an asset. It's an opportunity. Now, I won't get too much into governmental regulation on that, because that's an entirely different topic of, like, what should the policymakers say or do. I'll just say that it's essential that companies are compliant with that. That's what policymakers are for, is to make those policies. And there are cultural differences here that lead to some challenging things for companies. But I think the more important issue is the value exchange on data. The reason why Facebook got in trouble on the Cambridge Analytica stuff is because it was the use of data that people didn't see that they got any benefit from. Facebook rolled out a feature a few years ago, which was GPS tracking. It would track exactly where you were, and it would, all that data go along with you as your phone moved along. And when they rolled out this feature, it was actually received incredibly well, very positive NPS on it. And the reason why is because the way that they used the data was to help you know when you're nearby a friend that you might want to collaborate with or to spend time with. And they did it in a way where they didn't share information about your location that would be somehow spooky to the other person. The key principle here is give more than you take. And when Facebook has been on that positive side of that value equation, they have stayed out of trouble with these data privacy issues. When they fail to do that, they get in big trouble. And any data business, any business that is managing data, this is the thing that's most important to them. So regardless of what the policy is of the government, if you're thinking about value exchange, and I'm going to take data from you, but I'm going to give you value back. And as long as there's transparency about what it is that you're taking, and that there's agreement that what you're giving back is more valuable than what the person is giving to you, then this is like any other economic system. That's the kind of behavior and activity that people will continue to engage in over and over again. As soon as businesses stop doing that or fail to be responsible for data, as the credit rating agency I referred to earlier was, then they destroy that equation. And that's where policymakers then start to feel like they have to set the rules for everybody because the markets aren't doing it on their own.
That's great. So we got just a couple more questions. I promised him I'd get him out here, by sort of 9:05, 9:10. One question is, how important is coding today? So we have some classes in coding now at the business school. The dean has worked very hard along with the other people in the dean's office to get us a STEM designation at the business school, which has been great. But, do you have to know coding? Should everybody know a little bit of coding? I mean, how does coding fit into this whole new world of startups and everything else?
So full caveat, my background is software engineering, so I'm a bit biased on this, but I actually think it's really important. One of the things that we did with the sales organization at Facebook is we made Data Camp mandatory. Now, what is Data Camp? Data Camp was basically a 2-week program where we would teach people how to write SQL if they didn't know how to write SQL and answer business questions with data. And by teaching the sales organization how to do this stuff, we empowered them to answer questions that might be interesting, that their customers, advertisers on Facebook would be interested in, without having to burden a software engineer or a technical person to do so. Translate, moving forward to other aspects of business. There's not a single part of business in today's day and age that isn't technology enabled in some way, shape, or form. And those business leaders that have absolutely no idea how the technology works or have no capability of interfacing with or managing the technology, I think are at a disadvantage versus those business leaders who are. I wouldn't go so far as to say that if you know how to code, but you don't know how to lead, that you're going to be successful and the leader is not. That's not at all the case. But take 2 equivalent leaders, one who knows how to code and one who doesn't. I think the leader who knows how to code is going to be better in a technical environment because he'll be able to understand and influence other technical resources. In a non-technical environment, because he or she will be able to identify solutions that their counterparts may not be able to see as obvious in a world that is so digitally enabled that many of those solutions are going to be digital. So I actually think it's important. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to get a PhD in computer science. Learning how to do, some basic things in Python or SQL, these are easy languages. It's not beyond the capability of most people and can be quite freeing and enabling in the long term.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know because I've always wondered that myself. And we do have several offerings at the business school and with our Alumni Edge product and other things that we're offering online. That's great to know. We'll be adding some real value there. This is a really interesting question here. We'll do 2 more questions. One, this is from Travis, and I think this is something that we don't really talk about too much. And it kind of combines a bunch of questions. When you're interviewing people or when you're thinking about people working remotely, with these virtual backgrounds that we have and everything else, I mean, how do people really? Or how does a workforce, especially in a place like New York City, where space is at a premium and your apartment's workspace may also be doubling as your dining room table, where your kid's doing their homework at 3 o'clock? How do you sort all that stuff out? That's kind of tough, right? I mean, it's easy to say that we're working remotely, but it's not sometimes so easy to do. And great kudos to Columbia and to the university for providing us support and enabling us all to do that. Because being in the city. I happen to actually be out on Long Island where you visited last time. You got to get out here again, come out to Montauk again there, Tim. So I've got a little
Beautiful
bit of space out here. You love it. I know we're going to get you out here again. I have a little bit of space out here for which I'm blessed and grateful. But, if you're working from your apartment in New York City or maybe from an apartment in San Francisco, I mean, how do you make that work?
Well, I think part of it, technology does help with certain things, whether that's you mentioned the virtual backgrounds. Excuse me, that's a technology solution to this, and noise canceling headphones. That's another technology solution to this. I think this points to a little bit of how some of the downstream potential impacts of what's going on right now. Many homes are not well suited for working from home because they don't have a home office. The home office has become a guest bedroom, or in some places you may not even have space for that. And I think you'll find that this is going to be an increasing. It'll become as important as a closet or a bathroom or something like that. That you have that home collaboration space. Thinking even a little bit beyond that, I will point out that this is actually the reason why Facebook bought Oculus. The thesis there is that in the long term, that collaboration is going to be very much enabled by virtual and augmented reality. And for those of people who have not ever had a chance to try on a virtual reality headset, it is a way of sort of escaping and getting into another world. So much so that my kids and I have sometimes, when we, especially now when we're not able to go anywhere, we'll take virtual vacations using Google Earth. We'll put the virtual reality headset on and we'll try that out. And what's amazing about virtual reality is it doesn't require a lot of space. You're basically just putting this thing over your face, and the reality that you're going to be engaging and experience with is virtual. Those are all technical solutions. to the problem. I think the other side is, as I mentioned before, facilities design. But I also don't think it's going to be necessarily paramount. I mean, we are still human beings. We are still, creatures that are social. We like to spend time with each other. And while I think the coronavirus outbreak is causing us to think about how we interact with each other differently, I don't know that that's going to forever change society, that we will stop coming together and wanting to go to bars and spending time with each other. I think we're just going to be a little bit, maybe a lot more receptive to the alternative ways of collaborating with each other using the technology options that are now becoming very viable.
Yeah, it'll be interesting actually to see. We've had some speakers talk about kind of what they think is going to happen to New York real estate and things like that. Will people just get swing spaces, for when you need to be out of the home, et cetera. But that'll be interesting to see. Sort of in the new home building, everybody's going to have make sure that they have their office.
I don't know about New York because it's a unique place, but I'm actually not as optimistic about, for example, Bay Area real estate, which has been very much driven by supply constraints. I actually think that when it's possible, when you feel comfortable having a material percentage of your workforce working remotely, they can start living in places that might be more attractive for them to live. And for a lot of people, they don't want to have a tiny little house, on a postage stamp lot that costs $2 million and that they could barely afford. They want to live in a place that has more space. And so I do think that this may be a transition away from as much urban living as we've had and towards a little bit more suburban or rural living. Again, not night and day. It's not like we're all going to go live on a farm, but I don't think that we will face the same massive drive because the option or the opportunity for something different is more viable and cost effective.
Well, thank you. This was really, really helpful. It was great to connect with you again, and I hope to see you in person soon when we get to travel again. But thank you so much for giving up your time today and answering so many of our great questions that came from our panelists. And I want to also thank the Dean for coming and doing the introduction today and being very supportive of our efforts, and for my colleague and friend Greta Larson for getting this all together and making sure that all the trains run on time. So I'll look forward to seeing you again, Tim. Say hi to everybody, and everybody stay safe, and check out our next webinar coming up with Sterling Thomas. See you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.